Curves&Membranes. It is a single oscillator monosynth, which might sound modest until you see and hear what it does. It is not trying to be an do-everything synth. It is not trying to emulate vintage hardware synths. And it's definitely not trying to win by giving you more pages, deeper menus, and more settings to manage. The idea was different. I wanted to build a synth where the interface and the sound was tightly tied together. A synth that is visually clear, genuinely playable, and interesting enough to make you reach for the controls instead of browsing presets. I always liked single oscillator monosynths. My first synth was a Korg MS-10, and my all-time favorite is probably the Roland TB303. What I love about good, simple designs is that they are just a big sweet spot. You don't have to spend your time navigating the instrument, you just play it. Curves&Membranes is born out of the same attraction to focus and immediacy. It's obviously doing something much stranger than a classic one oscillator monosynth, but the goal was still the same. Make it hard to make it sound bad, and easy to understand what is happening. There is no modulation matrix. Each modulation source has a fixed role. So when you look at a patch, you can actually read it. The synth is intentionally limited. It is bad at a lot of sounds. That is not a flaw I discovered late in development. That is the product. The point was to make something specific, visual, and a bit unusual, and then push that idea. So, let's dig in. Let's look at the oscillator first. This is the curves part of the name. At the core of Curves&Membranes is a repeating single cycle Bézier waveform. And very early on I discovered that the interesting part was not just the waveform itself, but how it reacted when you moved it. At its simplest, the oscillator gives you a continuously shapeable waveform built from a midpoint and 4 handles. There are 3 wave modes. None, which gives you the pure Bézier shape. Clip, which clips the waveform against the first visual boundaries. Fold, which folds it back against those boundaries. With none, you can move between sine-like, saw-like, triangle-like, and more unusual shapes with a pretty smooth overtone character. With clip, it becomes easier to emphasize odd partials, squarish shapes, pulse-like tones, and combinations that feel more angular. With fold, things get more aggressive. As the waveform pushes into the boundaries, it folds back on itself. If you keep the waveform static, other synths can get into some similar territory. But the real point of this oscillator is movement. By moving the midpoint or any of the handles, you can create timbral motion that goes from subtle to vocal to sharp and unstable sounding, while pitch stays extremely stable. That is a big part of the character here. A lot of movement, but still very pitch stable. The generated wave is also automatically DC balanced, which helps to keep things clean while you're pushing stuff around. There is also some internal logic to how the points behave. The midpoint is the dominant. It can temporarily push the other handles around. Handles 2 and 3 can do the same with the outer handles. So by using the dominant point strategically, you can place the waveform in a more extreme natural position than it first appears. That is especially useful when you want sharper and more aggressive tones. The pitch controls are intentionally simple. You can set the range from 32 foot up to 1 foot. Offset the bass pitch linearly up to 1/2 of an octave. You can add a basic LFO or noise modulation to the pitch and use portamento in regular or legato mode. The interesting part starts when we stop moving the waveform by hand and start modulating it. The oscillator has 2 modulation concepts that can run at the same time. The first is the Wave Bézier presets. This is a bank of 8 waveform slots. Each slot stores the current wave shape, and when you edit the active slot by hand, it updates automatically. So the preset bank is not just for recall, it is part of the instrument. All 8 slots starts as a sine wave, and from here you can shape them manually or hit randomize to generate a new position for the midpoint and handles in the current slot. That makes it very easy to find movement ideas quickly. Then you can control how the synth travels between presets using preset slew. With slower slew setting, it morphs between shapes in a way that is extremely hard to perform manually. That is where it starts to feel alive. You can also use the presets as kind of a wave sequencer. Set the clock to int or host, choose the rate or division, and the synth will step through the preset slots automatically. In this mode, preset slew becomes the percentage of the step used for the transition. So now you are not just sequencing notes, you are sequencing overtone structure. That gives you sounds with a lot of motion and a lot of internal change, while the pitch stays stable. And like any sequencer, part of the fun is changing order. Forward, reverse, pendulum, random, skips, and yeah, my life, which behaves kind of like certain plants do. You can reset the sequence from the keyboard, or turn the clock off and step through the presets manually per note using keyboard to next. With no slew, that gives you a new waveform on every note. Great for sequenced bass lines. With some slew, it becomes much more fluid and expressive. That is the first modulation system. The second is more visual. These are the Orbital Modulators. Because the synth is built around the visual relationship between shape and sound, I wanted the modulation to work the same way. Each orbital modulator moves a selected point or handle along an elliptical path. You set the radius, the rate, the ellipse shape and the rotation. The point then moves along that path, either freely or synced to host tempo. Positive and negative rates simply change the direction. By changing the ellipse amount, you can go from a circle to a straight line and everything in between, either horizontally, vertically, or at any angle once you add rotation. So even though the controls are simple, you can get quite a wide array of motion. You can also reset the orbit on key press using keyboard reset. A small useful detail: if ellipse is set to -1, reset starts from the outer end of the line. If it's set to 1, it starts from the middle. With rotation you can choose the direction of travel pretty precisely. Once keyboard reset is enabled, you also get env. That turns the modulator from a repeating motion into a half revolution shape. In other words, it becomes kind of an envelope, but is still based on the same visual movement logic. That gives it a slightly different feel from a standard ADSR style modulation, more geometric and two-dimensional. Each point and handle has its own independent orbital modulator, and clicking a point highlights its modulator panel. And both modulation systems run in parallel. So you can have the preset sequence morphing through waveforms while all 5 orbital modulators are moving independently at the same time. That can get extremely animated very quickly, but because the structure is visible, it stays readable. Now let's move to the filter. This is the membranes part of the name. Just like the oscillator, the filter was built around the idea that sound and visual behavior should be tightly connected. Part of the inspiration came from filter banks behaving like multimode filters. Part of it came from scientific simulation models. The result is a filter built from an array of 32 spectral lanes, where each lane behaves like a vibrating membrane tongue. That is the core idea. There are 3 actuator points working in parallel: low pass, band pass and high pass. For each point, the x-axis sets the frequency and the y-axis sets the amplitude. When the incoming sound excites matching frequencies, the membrane lanes respond. You see the energy in the display as a flickering light glowing out from the center. So again, what you hear and what you see are closely related. With damping turned up, the filter behaves more cleanly and conventionally. As you reduce damping, the membrane vibrations become audible, especially in the lower lanes. And by adjusting tensions, you can change the frequency of those vibrations. That adds a subtle noisy texture to the sound. It's not always huge, but it matters. It is part of the instrument's character. Emphasis works a bit like soft resonance, accenting the spectral lanes around the filter point. Width controls how broad the accentuation is across all 3 bands. With wider settings and full damping, it gets closer to a more familiar filter feel. With narrower setting and less damping, it becomes much more idiosyncratic. Each filter point also has its own orbital modulator, so the filter can move using the same visual modulation concept as the oscillator. And each point can track the keyboard along the x-axis. One nice trick here is to keep things fairly narrow and sweep the bandpass point across the membrane lanes. That gives you a very distinctive rhythmic emphasis that does not feel like a normal filter sweep. Up in the top right there's also a few stereo controls. Stereo width spreads the odd and even filter lanes in the stereo spectrum. Stereo tilt shifts where the spread is the strongest. To the left it's wider in the lower lanes and tighter in the high ones. To the right it does the opposite. And output is simply the filter output level. So overall this is a filter with a lot of character and a fair amount of range, but with a very visual interface. Curves&Membranes also has a simple VCA style envelope tuned for monosynth use. In regular mode, a new note adopts the level of the previous one. With keyboard reset, it resets to 0 and restarts the envelope. In the signal path, it sits between the oscillator and the filter. There is also an init button to bring the synth back to a solid starting point. And that is really the whole philosophy here. Curves&Membranes is not trying to replace other synths. It is not trying to cover every synthesis method or every sound category. It is a focused instrument with one simple idea: to make sound, motion and visual feel like one thing. That focus is what gives it its strength. It means that there are sounds it does not care about doing, but within its own frame it can go surprisingly far. And because the structure is visible, it stays inviting. You are not solving a rotating puzzle, you are shaping motion. So that is Curves&Membranes, a deliberately focused monosynth built around a shapeable Bézier oscillator, visual modulation and a membrane-based filter. It is strange in a very intentional way, but it's also simple to read, simple to play, and I think unusually rewarding to explore. If that sounds like your kind of instrument, head over to unusable.net for a closer look. Thanks for watching.